everybody today? It's a really nice day. Man, I haven't told Gina that I think we'll put the top down going on. Daniel. The book of Daniel is the last book of prophecy in the Old Testament. We have it right before all the minor prophets and so on. The book of Daniel is full of dreams, visions, legend, narratives, stories. It's for us to read, to absorb, to see how God used Daniel to glorify himself. And it also is used for the world. For us, for the world, for Israel. You see, because Daniel points us to the cross in the end. The book of Daniel is one of my favorite books of the Bible. Oh, you have the typical Sunday school class, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, the Lion's Den. All of those are really neat stories, especially for a 5-year-old. But I think as I have grown older, I've learned to appreciate the visions more so than the lions. You know, as I get older and I start to think of the life to come, I become captivated by the visions. You know, the Old Testament authors, they had a unique opportunity. They were used by God in a marvelous way. They were given the vision of the promises to come, the promise of salvation, though they never saw it come to fulfillment. They were gone. By the time Jesus came and lived his life and was crucified and resurrected, they were long since gone. I believe they were in heaven. I do. Because the Bible tells us that act of Jesus reflected backwards just as much as it projected forward. That's a comfort to me. That's a comfort. So the book of Daniel helps me as a man to understand some of the Old Testament authors in this way. You see, Daniel is projecting, at the end of his book, he's projecting the end times. Not only the final Antichrist, but he's also projecting Jesus on the cross. Chapter 9 of his book, he even gives us a time frame. And so all of Israel was looking for the Messiah when Jesus was born, because of it. So I say all that to say this about us. You know, the Bible tells us that Jesus is going to come again, right? And so, and Jesus said it himself, though we know not the time. But everybody's been looking forward to that since. Many have come and gone and are in heaven. But that promise is still out there. I think that we're like the Old Testament authors. And that we have the opportunity to project that time that's coming. We have the opportunity to say to the world that the Savior of the world is going to come again. So So those are some of the things that you get out of Daniel, at least I get out of Daniel. But I find no other fitting way to talk about Daniel and his book than to go to chapter 1. If you have your Bibles, I really would like for you to open up your Bible. If you don't have your Bible, please bring it. I never want us to get used to not having a Bible. Oh, we have our electronic devices, and golly, I think I probably have 7 different versions of the Bible on my iPhone. And that's great. But there's just something about opening up God's Word and folding yourself into it. Daniel chapter 1. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and sieged it. And the Lord delivered Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hands, along with some of the articles from the temple of God. These he carried off to the temple of his God in Babylon, and put in the treasure house of his God. Then the king ordered Ashpenazar, boy, I'm butchering these names, chief of his court official, to bring into the king's service some of the Israelites from the royal family and nobility, young men without any physical defect, handsome, showing aptitude for every kind of learning, well-informed, quick to understand, and qualified to serve the king's palace. He was to teach them the language and literature of the Babylonians. The king assigned to them a daily amount of food and wine from the king's table. They were to be trained for 3 years, and after that they were to enter the king's service. Among those who were chosen were some from Judah: Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. The chief official gave them new names. To Daniel, the name Belteshazzar. To Hananiah, Shadrach. To Mishael, Meshach. And to Azariah, Abednego. The 4 things that we learned from this. And I said, and we bring this up at the beginning, or that's brought up at the beginning, to help us to transition into what has happened. You see, Israel has sinned, right? Israel has sinned for decades, for hundreds of years. And it's now time that God is going to reckon them, if you will. Babylon comes in under the king Nebuchadnezzar and basically destroys Israel, Judah, the southern kingdom. So therefore, they are taken away. They are taken to Babylonia, where these men will be trained in Babylonian ways. History tells us that these men were probably somewhere in the neighborhood of about 16 or 17, maybe younger. But these were people that were handsome. They were smart. They were recognized as the cream of the crop, nobility of Israel. And so Nebuchadnezzar wanted to take advantage of that. So they entered into a program that would train them the Babylonian ways, literature, culture, power. They put them on a special diet in order to fatten them up, if you will, in the right way. They were eating the right foods, right? At least from a king's perspective. But the Bible tells us that Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they did not partake in the food. In fact, they refused to eat the food because it would defile them according to God's law. So they made an agreement with their keeper. They would eat the food that was provided by God's law, in God's law. And then they would see how that would do, how they would be either fit or they would get worse. Well, God blessed them because of their faith, because of their commitment, because of their obedience. And they grew even stronger than the rest. And so therefore they were allowed to have their own food. The other thing we learn in this section is the fact that the Babylonians were trying to deculture them from the old Israel ways and transform them into their own culture. So they gave them new names. They gave them Babylonian names. They gave them names that would help them to forget their upbringing, their nation, their God. But they didn't. In fact, the Bible tells us that they continued and grew and worshiped God. They obeyed God, even in the midst of their situation. They continued to grow. The Bible also tells us that because of their growth, because of their obedience to God, God blessed them in every way and used them to represent Him in the kingdom of Babylonia. The kingdom of Babylonia. But Daniel doesn't stop there. The book of Daniel goes on to dreams and visions. In chapter 2 and chapter 4, there's an account of Nebuchadnezzar's dreams. Both of them bewilder the king. Both of them are very scary to the king. He calls all of his wise men, he calls all of his magicians and astrologers, and all of those people to come and interpret what he's dreamed. The first one, however, he does not tell them his dream. He challenges them. He challenges them to tell him what he dreamed and then interpret it. The Bible tells us that the wise men of Babylonia, the astrologers, the counselors, the magicians, they all say to him, this is beyond human capability. So Nebuchadnezzar gets angry. And he decides to kill all of them, including Daniel, because he was part of these wise men. Daniel asks for time. And he goes away and he prays to God. He sets before him all that's happening. He's honest, open, probably a little scared to death. God answers his prayer. He answers his prayer by giving him the answers to Nebuchadnezzar's question, his request. So Daniel comes in and he tells Nebuchadnezzar what he dreamed. And then he goes on to interpret the dream. Nebuchadnezzar is full of awe with this. And he begins to respect Daniel and Daniel's God. So 2 chapters later, Daniel is again in front of Nebuchadnezzar. Same situation. With the exception, he tells Daniel what the dream was. Daniel again interprets the dream. This one's a little different. This dream, Nebuchadnezzar sees his demise. Nebuchadnezzar sees where there's going to be a coup, if you will. Nebuchadnezzar will lose power. The dream says that he will go and he will be so humble that eats the grass of the field like animals. You see, Nebuchadnezzar became very, very powerful in the world. He became very, very rich as well. The envy of many kings. And it all went to his head. So one day when he was surveying his kingdom, he thought how great he was. And exalted himself and not God. So immediately the dream came to fulfillment. For many years, Nebuchadnezzar would be in exile, in a sense. Others would come and steal his kingdom. He would go and he would be humbled, eating that grass at the field. He even becomes insane. But he comes to a point where he realizes that the God of Daniel is the true God. And so he exalts Daniel, he exalts God. The Bible tells us that he is restored to his power. You know, I have to tell you, there's been a time in my life where I've really related to Nebuchadnezzar a lot. I understand how one can go and become so prideful in their accomplishments and all of these things. I can understand when God humbles them. So I think that we, as children of God, we need to take Nebuchadnezzar's story and store it away. You know, we live in a great nation. Great nation. There's so many opportunities. There's so many things that we can accomplish. There's so many things that we can build up. There's so many barns and storehouses that we can build and fill them up. There's so many bank accounts and so many investments and so many IRAs and so many this and so many that you can go and you can put an enormous amount of money into these accounts and gain and grow your money. And I'm not saying that that's bad. Not at all. But what is bad is if we lose sight of how we got there in the beginning. If we begin to think of ourselves as, I've done all of this, and I have done all of that, and I have accumulated all this wealth, and all these barns, and all these silos, and all this grain, and all this power, and all this kingdom, and all this empire. We don't think about giving credit to God. I think that's where the sin is. That's where all of this good can become bad. And God gives us many good things. Many good things. But if we go outside the boundaries of that good, it becomes a sin. We trespass. That's another lesson that I pull out of Daniel. That I have to be constantly mindful of. Constantly. God is very, very good to me. Even when I haven't deserved it. I'm sure He's done that to you too. And in those times of being thankful for what we have, make sure you're thankful for God and not doing The book of Daniel doesn't stop there, though. The book of Daniel, in both chapters 2 and 4, he gives thanks to God, right? In chapters 2:28, as a matter of fact, I'm going to read that because it's very significant. But there, he's talking to Nebuchadnezzar, but there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries. He has shown King Nebuchadnezzar what will happen in days to come. Your dream and the visions that passed through your mind as you were lying in bed are these. Dreams. But see, Daniel was taking the time to even represent God before Nebuchadnezzar. So I think that we as Christians have the same opportunity. When people comment or see your goodness, whether that be wealth or property or both, your good nature, I think we need to be quick to make sure that we give the credit where the credit is due. Anything that we've done. Remember, Paul says there's no unrighteous, not one. So I think that we have to make sure that our goodness goes to God. In every way. In every way. So we don't become Nebuchadnezzar. In chapter 4, chapter 5. By this time, Nebuchadnezzar is gone. His son, Belshazzar, is now the king. And he does not remember the dreams of his father, or the interpretations of David, or how Nebuchadnezzar was humbled. It's obvious because in the first couple of verses of chapter 5, they are at a party. And he orders that the goblets, the gold and the silver goblets that were taken from the temple of Israel, God's temple, be brought in. And they were going to use them at this party. They defiled the sacraments. The story goes that when they did this, a hand appeared. A human hand appeared and began writing on the wall. The Bible tells us, here's the comedy relief in this. The Bible tells us that the king turned many colors. And his knees started knocking. I think I understand that. I think I'd be right there with you. A hand appeared and started writing on the wall. But, like his father, he called all the magicians, he called all the counselors, he called the wise men, the astrologers, to try to interpret what was written on the wall. And they couldn't do it. Then someone suggested they bring in Daniel, who had been great at interpreting things for Nebuchadnezzar. So he comes in, and he does interpret the things on the wall. But he lashes out at the king, reminds him of his dad's commitment to the Lord. Reminds him of how the story went where he fell and was raised again to power. And how stupid, if you will, this king was. That he had failed to learn the lesson of his father. I wonder how many of us do that too. I know I did. I had to relearn things, right? So the interpretation was this: that the king was going to have a short reign. That the kingdom of Babylonia going to end in short time. And within that very night, the Bible tells us that Cyrus from the north, the Medes and the Persians came and overtook Babylonia and began to rule, killing the king. But God was good to Daniel, and even that. Because he made sure that those kings saw favor, saw intelligence in Daniel. So Daniel rose to power again with that king. But as the wise men of the day, they got tired of Daniel. They got tired of him always rising to power. So they developed a plan. They developed a plan to trick the king into pursuing anyone who wouldn't worship the king, even putting him into the lion's den. Daniel, knowing full well the new law, the new decree, goes just like he always does. He goes to his room and prays. And he prays just like he always does. He didn't hide. He didn't whisper. Didn't do a silent prayer. And he was caught in their trap. The story goes that Darius, the king, was very concerned, very distraught, because he knew that these wise men had fooled him. He loved Daniel. So Daniel is thrown into the lion's den. You know the story. God closes the mouths of the lions. Daniel's put right into the middle of the lion's den. He doesn't get eaten. You know, I look at that in modern day times. I can't say that I've been in a lion's den. But in the business world and in my career, I felt like I've been in Shark Tank. You know? In those times when I have been in a situation where it was dangerous, if you will, I remember praying for God to give me wisdom, give me strength, help me not to be stupid. And I think that there's a lesson in there for all of us, is that Daniel's obedience to God was overwhelming. I mean, it's riddled throughout the entire book of Daniel. I get so excited to see his faith, his obedience. As I reread this week, it rekindled some of the energy that I had years and years ago reading it. And it kind of made me feel at peace in a sense. Challenged me. It challenged me that I need to rekindle some of those things that Daniel did. I need to rekindle them in my life. My prayer life, my obedience, my boldness, and a compassionate and loving way. The thing that I like about Daniel as well is the fact that, while he was bold, it wasn't in your face and all this yelling and pushing and manipulating and all that. It's not his style. He just put it out there. I saw a phrase this week from a pastor that I follow on Instagram, Greg Lowry. He says this: it's not important to win the argument, Because that, in a sense, is what Daniel was doing. He was just presenting God. And God doesn't need Bob Farrar to convince the kings of the world or leaders of whatever. God is powerful enough to do that. He just uses us as an introduction. I love that about the book of Daniel. And even in the worst of circumstances, can you imagine telling your boss that and you're going to be eating grass like an animal? And he did. But the Bible says that he had compassion when he did that. So as much as Daniel is glorifying God in what he is seeing and what he's interpreting, he's also glorifying God in his attitude and in his bedside manner, if you will. I think that that's a lesson for us. Making sure that we have the compassion of God whenever we're sharing God. Too many Christians today, they go by the old phrase of open wide and shove this Bible down your throat. And when things like that happen, I gotta admit I was one of them in my life several years ago. I didn't understand. I didn't understand the compassion. The Bible comes back up at you. And they begin to use it against you. Because the simple fact is, we're not perfect. And so if we have compassion to share the gospel of Jesus Christ the same way that Daniel shared God with Nebuchadnezzar, it goes a long way. It goes further. It goes further. And God is glorified. God is glorified by that. The rest of the book of Daniel. The rest of the book is filled with visions and prophecy. From chapter 6 on, chapter 7 on, it's full of Daniel's dreams. It's full of visions that God gave to Daniel. As I said at the beginning of chapter 9, is the vision of Christ dying on the cross. It's the correct vision of the Messiah coming and dying. But chapter 11 and chapter 12 become pretty significant. You see, there's a period of time between the Old Testament and the New Testament that the Bible goes silent. There's nobody writing it down. Various sundry reasons, I suppose. Other than the fact that God didn't want it written down. But if you take the time to dissect Daniel chapter 11 and 12, you will gain an enormous amount of knowledge between that period between the Testaments. Scholars have said, and granted, we're talking 400 years. Scholars have said that the writings and the prophecy of Daniel in the book of chapters 11 in particular, are so accurate and so minute in detail. There has been accusations that someone else has written Daniel after the events took place. Manuscripts and so on have been found through what Christian scholars feel, biblical scholars feel is inaccurate from that perspective of somebody writing it afterwards. See, I believe that Daniel was inspired by the Word of God, Gabriel, and so on. threw it down. That exemplifies power. That exemplifies the power of God through Daniel. So as we go through this life, I would encourage you, pick up the traits of Daniel. Apply them to your life. And I did. Through the course of life, I guess I kind of dropped a few on the road. But this is like I said. If you haven't read Daniel in a while, take your time. It's 12 chapters. Probably take you a Sunday afternoon or 2-3 chapters a day. You'll be done in a week. But absorb the book. Don't just read it with speed. Have a sheet of paper and pull out the golden nuggets that exist in the book of Daniel. And apply them. That's the biggest lesson of all. Whether it's Daniel or any other book of the Bible. If we just read it to be reading it, like a Sunday newspaper, we're missing a lot. We're missing a lot. You see, because Daniel points to Jesus. Daniel points to Jesus. He's one of many in the Old Testament that do that. Over 300 prophecies. 300 prophecies point to Jesus Christ, the Messiah, the salvation to come. It's important that we understand that we are children of God. But if you're not, if you've got a burr under your saddle as a Christian, but you don't understand things, you're upset, don't harbor that. Find somebody and confess it and pray with them. And let them pray with you. If you're not a Christian, you've only heard of Jesus from a television program or a flyer you might have found blown over the street. Jesus is real. He was a real person that lived. Many call him a prophet. Those are the ones who don't understand this thing called Messiah. He is the Messiah. He's the one that the Old Testament writers have talked about and prayed about and longed for. He came, taught, beaten, beyond recognition almost, and taken to the cross and hung on Calvary. The blood dripped on the cross and ran down the cross and onto the ground. He did that for no other reason because he loved us. He wasn't doing it for glory, just the opposite. He wasn't doing it for himself. He was doing it for his Father. He was doing it for you. So we're going to have a time where we're going to stand and we'll sing. If there's anybody here, anybody that doesn't know Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior, man, now's the time. Come forward, we'll talk, we'll pray, we'll give you some instruction. Jesus wants you. God wants you. Peter tells us that God does not want anyone to perish. No one. The word perish means eternal damnation. So, let's stand.